What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today we're going to be working on a 2010 Volvo XC70. Today on the XC70 behind me, we're going to be covering how to rebuild your vacuum pump. Now, the brake booster pump is responsible for creating vacuum in the system, allowing you to have brakes and other things like that, whereas a traditional system usually runs off of the vacuum from your intake manifold. Most of these new European cars are either going to have an electronic vacuum pump or a mechanical vacuum pump like this one. Now, to learn a little bit more about vacuum pumps and why they are so important, be sure to click the link in the description below where our very own Nate Vincent takes you on a full tour of everything you need to know about the pumps. In front of me, we have three options to do this DIY. Today, we're going to be installing the Pro Parts Sweden rebuild kit, which is only about $50. Then you have the genuine Volvo kit, which is about $100. And then you have the OE Pureberg pump, which is just under $300. You can see right here where they etch off the genuine Volvo logo. If you were to buy this from Volvo itself, you're looking at just under $700. So you can see why this is a popular replacement here, and that's why we're going to cover how to install that. Now, the XC70 behind us has about 135,000 miles. As I mentioned, the seals have failed, so it's leaking pretty profusely. So we'll show you how to pull that out, rebuild it, and put it back in your Volvo. This is going to be applicable to all P3 vehicles with either the SI6 engine, the T6, or the 3.2 liter like the one that we're going to be working on today. But before we get started, let's go ahead and take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this DIY. And now for tools. For this DIY, we'll be using a 3/8 drive torque wrench. I have both a 3/8 drive and 1/4 inch drive ratchet, as well as a 5-inch extension for the 1/4 inch ratchet. We're going to be needing a T25, a 10 mil and a 13 millimeter socket. I have a flathead screwdriver, a small pick just in case. I have a paint pen so when we rebuild the vacuum pump I can mark that all down, and a bungee cord so that it will hold my intake pipe out of the way as we disassemble and remove our pump. Now with that said, let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, under the hood of the XC70, we're going to start by removing our beauty cover first. To do that, you can just grab on either end of the cover and pull up. Then we can just go ahead and set this off to the side. Now with that off, we're going to work on removing our air box. Now for me, I like to do this in two parts. I like to remove the top lid first so we can work on disconnecting our mass airflow sensor gently without having to pull everything up as one piece. And I also don't want to put any extra strain on the intake tube. So flathead screwdriver, 7 millimeter socket will also work to undo this clamp. With that undone, we're going to grab our T25, and we have 4 screws to remove along the perimeter of the airbox. We have 1 up front, we have 2 by the windshield washer cap, and then we have 1 between the box and the battery. These are captured bolts, so they will not come off of the lid, they'll stay with the lid. Now we can go ahead and gently pull up the lid off of our airbox. Your filter may come with it. We'll pull this lid out. We have 1 plastic clip that holds the harness to the lid itself. You can just use a flathead screwdriver to pry that off. And then you have 1 electrical connector that goes to your mass airflow sensor. Press on the tab and just slide it off. Now we're going to want to go ahead and pull out our air box. This is just held on by a couple rubber grommets. I like to reach in by the battery box. Just kind of use the small lip in there to grab it. I'll grab it from inside. Just pull up and then pull out like that. This ducting will line back up and we'll show you where it goes in when we install it again. Now at this point, we're going to want to remove the lid to our battery box as we're going to be removing the forward side of it so that we can access our vacuum pump. You have traditionally 2 tabs up front here that hold it into place, and then 1 on either side. Some of these are broken on ours, so it's going to come off pretty easily, but you just lift up on the tabs and pull it up. There's that tab I was talking about. You have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to work on removing this outer portion of our air box. We have our battery cable that runs through it. You can just lift that up, kind of let it hang to the side in there. Doesn't matter what side you pick. Using a small pick or flathead screwdriver, same idea. There's 4 tabs, 2 on either side. You're going to want to pry up a little bit to release from the rest of the box. There's 1. The bottom one was clearly not done properly, so it just came off. which is fine for this. Just 2. Same thing, this must have been off before. They did a battery recently. Just pull that off and clear it. Just be mindful when you're working in this area, you don't want to touch the top of the terminal with your tool or a ratchet, whatever you're working with. If you want, you can use some tape and just kind of cover that up so you don't make any contact with it. We'll go ahead and do that here just so we don't accidentally shock ourselves or damage anything on the vehicle. Now at this point, we're going to want to work on getting this intake pipe out of the way a bit so that we can remove this bracket underneath that kind of goes over our vacuum pump and our AC compressor. To do that, you can use zip ties, you can use a bungee cord. I have a bungee cord handy here. I'm just going to go ahead and kind of bungee it off to the side just a little bit, hook it over to the front of the bumper support here. That's more than enough just to keep it out of our way. From here we have a couple 10mm bolts and a 13 to remove to get this bracket out of our way. We have a 10 that holds our battery cable in place, as well as the bracket that holds our AC line in place. So we'll go ahead and remove this 10mm nut first. With that removed, we can pop this battery cable out of our way. And we can also pop this AC line off of this bracket. Next, we have 2 more 10mm bolts that hold this bracket over the main bracket that we need removed. Again, this is all bolted to the AC compressor body. So we have 110 that runs under our AC line, and we have 110 on the opposite side. So we'll go ahead and get those off next. There's 1 more 10mm nut that's sitting underneath the silencer portion of the intake tube right now, which if I undo that, it'll give me a little bit more play in this AC line so I can access that 10mm bolt a little bit easier. So I'll go ahead and pull that one off real quick. I can pop that line off of this stud here. Now I have a lot more room to get to this 10mm bolt down below. With that 10mm off, now we can go ahead and remove this bracket. And that now exposes the rest of this bracket that we initially wanted to remove. So we have 110 down by the AC line, 110 right below our intake tube, and we have a 13. So I'll continue with the 10mm and then we'll move over to the 13. I'm going to start with the lower 10mm first. Go ahead and break that off. Now, because these are a little bit different than the original 10mm that we took off that hold that top small bracket on, we're going to go ahead and set these in a different spot. But an easy way to tell is the first 2 that we took off, if you looked, have a bullet nose to them. These are just flat, so just keep that in mind. We'll go ahead and set this one up here along with the next 10mm up top that we're going to take off. Here you go. This is a nice long one. You can't confuse that one. That one goes directly on top of the AC compressor. And then we have, following over towards the valve cover, we have a 13mm that we want to get rid of as well. Right, that one can go up there as well. And now this bracket should be able to come off. All right, I'm going to keep this bracket with the hardware that we removed, which is just on my cowl. And now we have clear access to our vacuum pump. Now, before I disconnect the line going to our vacuum pump or anything else, I'm going to take this opportunity to set up some shop towels or a pig mat, whatever you have, and just kind of lay them underneath, covering the belt system. I'm going to take some degreaser and some brake clean, and I just want to clean the general area off first before I take the pump off. That way, when we have the pump off, I'm not cleaning and accidentally contaminating the camshaft end into the engine with any chemicals, and that way, when we assemble everything with our nicely cleaned and rebuilt pump, everything looks nice and nice. So we're going to clean that up real quick, and then we'll work on removing the pump. Now we have our area cleaned up a little bit. I'm going to work on disconnecting the vacuum line that runs to the pump up top here. You want to pinch on either side of it and then pull it back. Just be careful with it. You don't want to break this. You can rotate it a bit so you can get to both pinch points. The harness is a little bit in the way, but you can work around it. All right. Go ahead and pop that, let it sit to the side. Now we have 2 10mm bolts, 1 on either end of the pump that we're going to want to remove, and then the pump can come out. So using my same 10 that I've been using on the 1/4" ratchet with an extension, we'll go ahead and start that now. 1. Now we have the interior 10. And now before I pull the pump off, I'm going to place another shop rag under there just in case some oil comes out. I don't want to coat the drive belt system with any fluid, so let me grab a shop towel real quick. We'll cover that and then we'll pull the pump off. Now we can go ahead and pull our pump off. That's good, not too much came out. If you look at the bottom half of that, you can see how much that's been leaking. It is coated under there. So definitely due for a rebuild. I'm gonna go ahead and wipe up our general area just a bit here. All right, and if you want, while you work on this, you can put another shop rag in there. We're in a shop today, we're the only ones here. I'm not too worried about anything getting in there, but it doesn't hurt to use a towel and block off that port. But now we have our pump out. Let's go ahead and bring this to the table. We'll go ahead and clean it up. We'll rebuild it. One thing I advise, if you can, try not to rotate this. That way, when you put it back together, it can just key into the camshaft end again. If not a big deal, if you do rotate it, you'll just have to align it properly. So we're gonna try not to touch this as much as possible. Catch you over at the bench. All right, my good people, at this point, we have cleaned up our vacuum pump quite a bit. Definitely at a good point where we can work on it. To get started, I'm gonna start on removing this outer seal first, which you may be able to see on camera is super flat, it's super hard, and it's deteriorating, which is why that was so leaky. We're gonna use a small pick to remove it. Just be careful not to mar the surface. You don't wanna add any scratches and add any potential rooms for new leaks. We have a plastic scraper tool that will work just as well. You can see compared to the new one, how flat it is, a little bit expanded, and just definitely due for a replacement. So out with the old, we'll clean up this surface a bit with some shop rags here. This green seal is a little bit more improved than what comes in the genuine kit. It's a Vuitton seal, so it's a little bit better at high heat and keeping fluids out. So definitely a nice upgrade there. Moving along, we have this valve that connects to our pump itself that we want to replace. It has its own O-ring as well, which can fail over time. You can use a flathead or a small pick just to kind of work the ends out. It's got two small tabs that we want to push, one on either side. Here's the old one. Plastic gets pretty brittle over time, so it's just a good practice to replace it. We'll lube up this O-ring just a bit, and then we can go ahead and install it. You know, make sure the two ears, there's two notches cut out on the pump itself to align this plug. You want to make sure that those are lined up properly so that everything can clip in nicely. It's a pretty tight fit. Give it a couple pulls, but once it's in, it shouldn't come out as long as those two little locking ears make their way in on both sides of the pump. Now with that taken care of, we're going to replace the main seal for the pump body itself, as well as the hardware. So using our same T25 from the airbox, we'll go ahead and remove all 5 bolts. Now that I've drained the oil out of my vacuum pump, I'm just going to use a small beaker. You can use a roll of tape or a spray paint can top just to kind of sit this in here so I'm not pushing out the whole mechanism of the vacuum pump itself. We'll go ahead and clean it up. Here's our old seal. Not terrible, not as bad as the outside one that mates against the block, but definitely not great. You can pull this out, inspect it, make sure there's no abnormal wear on the ends. You can give the inside of the pump a wipe as well. You want to make sure you're using a cloth or a towel that isn't going to leave behind lint. Obviously, you don't want to use like a cheap paper towel or anything like that, or a rag that's going to have a lot of fuzzies on it. Clean the channel where the seal goes as well. And go ahead and reinstall the centerpiece. We can take our new gasket, feed it into the grooves on the vacuum body. You want to make sure when you install the seal that you install it with its flat side, if you will, facing up towards the plate. It has a tiny ridge in it that's going to help seal against the outside of the vacuum pump. Once your seal is situated and you're happy with it, now we can go ahead and reinstall the plate and close this up. And then we'll start all our new hardware by hand. Once you have them started a couple threads, then you can snug them down with the ratchet. And then we're going to torque all 5 down to 7 Newton meters. All right, now that we have all our hardware buttoned down just by wrist, we're going to go ahead and torque it down, but we can get it off of our pedestal here. All right, and there you have it, my good people. You have one rebuilt vacuum pump. Now we can head back over to the XC70 and reinstall this. All right, my good people, back at the XC70, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our vacuum pump. I went ahead and lined up the pump as best as possible so it keys into the cam end easier, but you can just rotate it if you need to. So we'll go ahead and feed that over. There we go. It'll pretty much stay in place while you grab your 10mm bolts. Then we can go ahead and start them by hand. I'm going to use the socket on the extension just to feed them in by hand. Then I'll snug them down with the ratchet. And I'm using the 1/4 inch, not too much torque, as we're going to torque them down. Just nice and snug. And now we're going to torque them down to 17 Newton meters. There's 2. Now with those torqued down, we can go ahead and reinstall our vacuum line up top. That clips on nicely. Then with that, we can go ahead and pull up this battery cable, and we can go ahead and reattach our bracket once more. I have to feed it under this harness, get it into place. We'll just feed all our 3 bolts in by hand first, and then we'll torque them down. So I'm gonna go ahead and start them by hand. Again, the shortest 10mm went down below by the AC line. Then we'll do the next one, which is the long one. It goes right up top of the AC compressor under our intake pipe. And then we'll do our 13. We're going to torque our 13 down to 50 Newton meters. And then this 210s, we're going to torque those down to 24 Newton meters. There's 2. Now we have this bracket on, we can go ahead and reinstall the other bracket that went over top. This one sits under the battery cable. It's also held in by 2 10mm bolts. We'll start the easy one first, just to hold the bracket in place. And we have that sneaky one under the AC line. And just like the other 2 10mm bolts, we're going to torque these 210s down to 24 Newton meters as well. There's 2. Now with that plate secured, we can go ahead and reattach our AC line to that stud right here, as well as the stud underneath the intake tube that we removed earlier. All right, and then before we add any 10mm bolts, we can go ahead and feed our power cable P-clamp back over that stud as well. And now we can install both 10mm nuts. We'll just hand start this top one for now. And then we'll move under the intake tube and secure down the other 10mm nut for the AC line. I have 110 right here. These we're just going to snug down by hand. They don't take a lot of torque. You don't want to rip the stud. If you really wanted to torque them down, no more than 10 Newton meters. But for today, the old calibrated wrist will do just fine. With that one secure, we can move over to the one that holds the AC line and our battery cable, and nice and snug is good. Now we can reinstall the front portion of our battery box, making sure that battery cable stays over it. Probably wouldn't have been a bad idea to leave that 10mm till last, but learn from me. Don't do as I do, do as I say. Feed that grommet back into the cover. All 4 corners are in. You can take this tape off. You put the top lid of our battery box back on. There used to be 2. There's only 1 hook left that latches onto the bottom of the cowl there. With that situated, now we can go ahead and get rid of this bungee cord. Now we can go ahead and reinstall the lower portion of our airbox. You want to make sure that this tube goes back into the ducting by the radiator. You don't want to miss that, otherwise it'll give you a hard time when you put the box back in. You also want to make sure your rubber grommet keys back into that little tab behind the windshield washer fluid cap. We'll go ahead and key that in. Line this up over here. We can line up our box. Just line up our box, make sure it's going into place. And there we go. Now we can pop our air filter back in. We have our nice new Mala Volvo filter. Now we can take our lid. We can reconnect our mass airflow sensor once more. Pretty straightforward, just until you hear a click. You clip the harness back to the body of the lid after you put it into the intake tube so you have some slack. Then that metal tab inside that clip bites, and you can line up the lid on the airbox. Once you have it lined up properly, you can secure all the 4 T25s back down. When you tighten these down, you just want to be gentle with it. They are metal screws going into plastic, so you don't want to strip the threads. You don't really need to torque them down too much. Once they snug up, that's good. Don't forget the one between the battery and the airbox. We can line up our hose clamp and tighten down that once more with our flathead screwdriver. And then last but not least, our beauty cover can go back on. Use the oil filler cap to kind of line it up. And bam, my good people, there you have it. Another DIY in the books. Overall, a pretty easy and doable job on the XC70. Again, today we were working on the 3.2, but it is also applicable to this SI6 and the T6. If you like this video, you know the drill. Give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, leave them in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.